I am disbelieving, disappointed, and disillusioned in roughly equal measure, but I'm also determined. As you will hear in the news section of today's show, part of a building ended up in a British street yesterday because of a misplaced faith in the ability of scaffolding to hold back a collapsing structure. We've been down this path countless times before, including on 3 occasions in quick succession back in 2019. This needs to stop before someone is hurt, or worse still, someone is killed. We'll be addressing that in the news, but we'll also be talking about it in the after show chat as well. Yesterday morning, literally while I was babbling on about something or other, a building collapsed in the town of Stevenage, spilling debris into the street. The building was Swingate House. It was owned by Stevenage Borough Council and it was undergoing demolition at the time of the collapse. The principal contractor on the project is Mace, and the demolition contractor is Kane Group. Swingate House crumbled at approximately 10 a.m. yesterday, and I'm about to play you some CCTV footage that captures the collapse. Just watch how close this came to an unmitigated disaster. Roads in the town centre around the building were closed so that emergency services and contractors could deal with the clear up. Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service said it was not aware of any casualties. Andy Hall from the fire service said it was investigating the cause of the collapse. We're currently assessing with partners from Stevenage Borough Council about the stability of the building. We've got structural engineers on site, he said. He also said a plan was being put in place as to how the building would be demolished safely over the next few days. A council spokeswoman said it had been empty for some time, but the rescue dogs and thermal imaging were used to check no one had been inside, and it was monitoring the situation. The area's Conservative MP, Stephen McPartland, said on social media that he wanted a clear explanation about what had happened. Thankfully and luckily and miraculously, no one was injured when the building gave way and spilled out into the street, which is great. But the fact that we're reliant upon luck and miracles is surely of huge and urgent concern. Because this is not an isolated incident. Back in the summer of 2019, there were 3 collapses in quick succession in Reading, London, and then in Nuneaton. No one was hurt in those incidents either, but it now feels like an injury, or worse still, a death is now inevitable. And yet it is avoidable. I spoke at length last night to a highly respected demolition engineer and consultant. He covered a lot of ground, and he will do so again right here on the show at some point in the next few days. But the takeaway from the conversation was this: demolition contractors need to grow a pair of balls, insist on a brief and temporary road closure while a building is put on the ground, and stop relying upon scaffolding to do a job it was never designed to do. Of the dozens of calls I received yesterday, this was a message that was repeated time and time and time again. In one instance, a leading demolition contractor has been trying to explain to a well-known client why scaffolding and a high-reach excavator were a bad mix. The client insisted upon the scaffold. The demolition contractor in question then showed the client details of yesterday's collapse. The client agreed that this was terrible and awful, and then insisted upon scaffolding once again. In the aftermath of the collapse in Reading in 2019, the National Federation of Demolition Contractors issued what it described as a guidance on the use of scaffolding in the demolition arena. Personally, I saw the guidance as a thinly veiled attempt to gloss over the involvement of member company McGee Group in the incident, but that's an aside. Guidance is not what is required here. What is required here is a unified refusal to use scaffolding to support a building that's being undermined by demolition. That is not the purpose of scaffolding. It never was, and it never will be. There are better ways, safer ways. If you'd like some additional reading on this subject, I posted in the chat a link to a preliminary report that we commissioned into the Reading collapse back in 2019. There's a lot to be said on this subject of scaffolding in the demolition business. But when you whittle it down, and I realise that demolition isn't actually Ken Hatcher's primary role here, but this pretty much sums up the role of scaffolding as a whole. Scaffolding is for walking on. Yeah, exactly that. It is for walking on. It's not to prop up a structure. That's not the purpose. I mean, there will be machinations about this collapse in Stevenage for weeks, probably months to come. My guess is that the HSE will be poring over that for the next couple of days, and then we'll go away for about 4 years before drawing up what their findings. But there is so much to unpick here, and I will. I'm not going to name names because I told him I wouldn't. But I spoke to a demolition contractor yesterday, very well known, very reputable, and he was in negotiation with a client, very well known, a very respected client, and the client was insisting upon the use of scaffold alongside a high-ridge excavator. Demolition contractor who knows his onions told the client, no, that's not the way to do it, that's unsafe, you're putting men at height when you don't need to, you're putting them within a few inches or a few feet of a working high ridge. You don't need to do that, we can do it a better way, we can do it a safer way, and so on down the line. And the client said, no, I've heard all that you said, but I still want scaffolding. So as a last resort yesterday morning, the demolition contractor in question grabbed our video footage and all the feedback that was coming in on the Stevenage collapse and sent that over to the client and said, this is why I am fearful of using scaffolding. And the client came back and said, yes, I can see that's terrible, that's awful, but we'd still like to use scaffolding. There needs to be a unified approach to this within demolition circles. Enough is enough. You saw, I've not done the count, I can probably play it again actually if I need to, but I reckon there was probably 5 or 6 seconds between that car or taxi driving past that site in Stevenage yesterday and the hoarding blowing out. If he had been 5 or 6 seconds slower, in other words, if the traffic lights down the road had delayed him just a fraction of a second or two longer, we would be talking about a fatality today. We cannot have an industry that relies on luck and good fortune and miracles. Paul Brown, good morning, Paul. Good to see you here. Thank you for tuning in. It wasn't just scaffolding; it was the use of the high ridge, and therein lies the issue. Scaffolding has its place, if you need to access and and I understand the need to put up monoflex to keep the dust in and contain little bits of debris. I understand all of that, but the point that you are believing, and I do think there are clients there that believe this, that you affix a scaffold to a building while you're demolishing it, in case something goes wrong, the scaffolding will hold that thing up. It will not. It will not. And think about, if anybody's ever looked even briefly at scaffolding, you think about it, it's fixed at certain points on a building. Let's say it's fixed at a certain point of concrete, or it's fixed to a certain brick, and that brick fails. The whole thing goes down. And bearing in mind, we're entrusting the stability of a building here to a structure, scaffolding, that regularly blows over in high wind. If it can't withstand a strong gust of wind, it will not ever withstand the collapse of a building upon it. As I said, and I realise I'm critical of the NFDC on a regular basis, but the outcome of the Reading collapse was that they produced a video guidance in conjunction with McGee Group. McGee Group were actually the contractor on the job at Reading where the collapse happened, and the whole thing just smacked of what's the term? A cover-up, a glossing over. It was a way of making McGee Group look good in the result, in the aftermath of something that had gone horribly wrong. That's not what was required. What is required is for the industry to get its head together. And my personal feeling here is that it should be done at the IDE rather than the NFDC. I think the IDE has got more members because we're talking about individuals, we're talking about qualified people like our friend Paul Brown, who is an MIDE, He's got letters after his name to prove the fact that he is a proper bona fide demolition engineer. We need those demolition engineers to educate their clients about the risks involved in using scaffolding alongside a high-reach excavator. And more than that, one of the big things that came out of that report, that was just a preliminary report that we commissioned with a demolition engineer. As you can see, it's a very detailed document. There's lots and lots of it. But one of the key things that came out of that was effectively a suggestion. And that suggestion was quite simply, rather than using scaffolding and relying on scaffolding, tell your client that you need a temporary road closure. You do it over a weekend. So let's say you start on first thing on a Saturday morning, and you take a building like that Swingate House, and you push the whole thing in on itself away from the road. The road will be closed for 24, possibly 48 hours. The demolition site for a couple of days will look a bit untidy, but there is no way on earth that building, because of the methods that are being used, there's no way that building is going back out onto the road. So you've got pedestrians and road users are safe. You've not got men working at height on scaffolds, so they're made safe. Instead of which, we have clients and local authorities that are we've got clients that are refusing to request a road closure, and we've got local authorities that are refusing to give those road closures. And look at this Swingate House in Stevenage. I don't know if Ken Group actually applied for a road closure. I would like to think they did, but I don't know. Maybe that will come out in the fullness of time. If they did and it was refused, now bearing in mind that Swingate House also leads to the car park at Westgate, which is the main shopping centre for Stevenage Town Centre. My guess is if there was an application for a road closure and that road closure request was denied, it was denied because it would prevent access to the shopping centre, to the car park. It would be an inconvenience to local people. Now look, not only have they got road closures in place, they've got the police involved, they've got the health and safety executive involved. They put people, both within the demolition fraternity and pedestrians and road users, at risk, and they've achieved nothing. They've achieved nothing. And in absolute truth, if the investigation by the HSE is in any way thorough, that road closure will be in place far, far longer than it would have been if they'd have given the permission to the demolition contractor in the first place. How does that make sense? And again, I'm going to throw this back up. I'm going to come back to Paul Brown in a second. But I was speaking to a demolition engineer, very well regarded senior demolition engineer, demolition consultant last night. Why is the demolition of a structure in a town centre different to the demolition of a bridge over a motorway? Whenever I think of bridge demolitions on a motorway, I always think of Armac. Can you imagine Armac agreeing to take down a bridge on the M1 or the M42 or whatever? Let's say the M1. They're going to take down a bridge on the M1. Can you imagine a situation where Armac say, don't worry about closing the road, we'll be fine. We'll just work around every time there's a bit of clear road, we'll drop a bit more bridge. It'll be fine. Of course they wouldn't. Of course they wouldn't. They insist on that road being closed for 48 hours, even if they know full well that project is only going to take 36. They want some contingency. They also want to protect the road, and ultimately they want to protect their workforce, and they want to protect road users. And so when a demolition contractor of the experience and the capability of Armac sit down with Highways England or whatever it might be and say, we're going to take down a bridge over the M1, we need that road to be closed from that point to that point, and we will not be interrupted at any point during that. And quite rightly, the client and Highways England and National Highways sit there and nod sagely and say, yes, absolutely, that is definitely 100% the way to go. You move that project to a town centre where we have got way, way, way more pedestrians. and suddenly a road closure, even bearing in mind, I don't know if you can see it. Can I show you? No, I can't. I will have to. I could play the video in the background, I guess. As you can see, I mean that road that we're looking at there is not particularly big. It's not like we're talking about a main thoroughfare here. To have closed that for 24, 48, 72 hours would not have inconvenienced anyone to any great degree. And yet, look at what we've got there. That happened at 10 o'clock yesterday. The chances are the health and safety executive are still there today. There will then be meetings with structural engineers and consulting engineers about how to best proceed. There will then be a clear up. So that road, my guess is that road will not be open again much before Monday, because either the demolition contractor didn't ask, and if they didn't ask, they probably didn't ask because they know the answer that you usually get in these instances, or they did ask and that request for a road closure was declined. And now look at the mess that we've got. As Paul Brown has rightly said, if it's windy, it adds further load to the structure. All of this is very, very basic engineering. Even when you look at the, I can't show you that one, I don't think. Let me just have a very quick look. I may have a photograph here that I can show you. No, I haven't, unfortunately. But when you look at that building, basically the middle of the building has fallen out. So where all the strength is in that building, at either end, i.e. where the lift shafts or the stairwells are, that has stood firm. We know that, and that it's a basic piece of engineering. That's where the strength is. But that part in the middle is obviously weak, and it's been weakened still further by the use of a high reach. I had lots of calls yesterday, people suggesting that the attachment on the high reach was wrong, the fact that it was a high reach that shouldn't have been a high reach, and so on down the line. And one of the most telling, and I did mention this, we did a couple of live shows yesterday as this news was breaking. One of the things that really stood out for me was I had a call from a demolition contractor who had, in actual fact, 2 demolition contractors that had priced that same job, and both of them had submitted plans to take that down via top reach. So they were going to put Brocks or mini excavators on the roof, take it down 1, 2, 3 levels, and then bring in a conventional excavator to do the remainder. My guess is, because you've got to get a crane in to put the machines on the top, which will again potentially require a road closure, which local councils don't particularly like. But as a result, they decided to go against that. The 2 contractors that I spoke to, who again I won't name, they didn't get the job. Somebody else did. Somebody else decided to do it a different way, i.e. with scaffolding and high reach, and now that building lies in the street in Stevenage. When this investigation is conducted, there will be a paper trail. There will unquestionably be a paper trail, and that paper trail will show the bids from those contractors that didn't get the job. I would like to think they will have retained the details of how they had proposed to do that job. And there will also be a side-by-side comparison of the company that did get the job and the price. And I want that, from my point of view, I want it on the record that somebody needs to look at all the facts and figures that goes with that and do a comparison. Let's just for 1 second set aside the safety factors here. Let's say that job was bid, and I'm sure it was more than this, but I'm going to work in very, very simple figures. Let's say that the 2 contractors that wanted to take it down via top down had offered to do it for, let's say, £100,000. And the company that decided to do it via a high reach said they could do it for £75,000. So the local authority, Stevenage Borough Council, have saved themselves £25,000. How much has it cost to have the road closed, to have deliveries to Westgate Shopping Centre delayed, to have police on station, to have the health and safety executive on station, to have to redirect traffic away from that area for 1, 2, possibly even 5 days? How much does that cost? Because I guarantee it will be more than the 25 grand that they stuffed in their back pocket by going for the cheaper option. And that's what we're talking about. Now, that's just the financial issue. What is also the problem here is the fact that selected methodology placed at risk demolition people and pedestrians. That taxi that drives past was 4-5 seconds away from that taxi driver being killed by a collapse on a UK demolition site. And that sits really, really badly with me, I'm afraid. Had a couple of comments. The continual clash between the experienced contractor and the client's risk-averse health and safety officer with little or no background in the specialised discipline. This was a key part of the conversation I was having yesterday, with several people actually. I can think of no industry where experts, like our friend Paul Brown, experts in their field, are second-guessed by people who do not do this job for a living. Imagine taking your car into the garage for a service, and an experienced, a 50-year-old mechanic who is, he's got all his certificates, he's got his own cabinet full of his own very, very specialist tools that he's collected and perfected over the years, and he lifts the bonnet of your car, and just as he's about to start work on your car, you lean over and whisper in his ear, "I can see what you're about to do, but any chance you can swap that spanner for a banana? Because I'd like to see that." I'm fairly sure the mechanic's answer would be roughly 2 words, and the second one would be off. But that is exactly what happens in demolition circles. We have got experienced, highly trained and qualified. Let's not lose sight of the fact that these are qualified. I've said Paul Brown there, MIDE. He has got an actual qualification in demolition, as have so many others in this industry. Off the top of my head, I think the IDE is probably 700, 800 members. Qualified, they've sat exams, they've studied. So many of them now have got degrees in demolition, various forms of demolition, and yet they are being told by somebody fresh out of university, "Yes, I hear what you say, but I'd quite like to see some scaffolding up the side of that." It's like I've been doing this job for 33 years. It's like somebody sticking their head around the door now and saying, "I can see the setup you have there, but what say you do it upside down, back to front, and maybe use a cine camera from the 1960s? That will be fine." No, it won't. Piss off. It will not be fine. It will never be fine. And unfortunately, we have a situation in demolition, and I don't think demolition is unique in this, but we have a situation here where there is always somebody that will be willing to take the risk. I've highlighted this over the years in terms of plant hire and rental. If you're renting out a backhoe loader for 250 quid, and a client is willing to search for long enough, they can find that same machine at 225. If they really are committed, they can find it at 220. We know full well that those that are hiring it out at 220 are making no money, the machine will be poorly maintained, and so on down the line. But there will always be somebody that is willing to do that. And that's the situation we have in demolition now. The two, I'm not going to name them, but the two demolition companies that I spoke to yesterday were talking about the fact that they had bid that job, and they had been very, very insistent upon the way that it should be handled, to the point where one of them even highlighted the fact that the concrete on that building was potentially flimsy, and therefore they didn't want to put men anywhere near it. Absolutely fine. And the client has seen that and gone, "Yeah, I hear what you say, but hey, throw some scaffolding up, it'll be dandy." What qualification did that client have? What qualification did that local authority officer have? Are they qualified in demolition? My guess, my knowledge is no, they bloody weren't. And yet they have made a decision that has put at risk the life of a taxi driver and a whole team of demolition men and women, and potentially pedestrians walking past that site as well. When the HSE carries out its investigation, I've got a couple more comments here, but when the HSE investigation takes place, there will be a temptation to point the finger of blame at the demolition contractor. But the demolition contractor was allowed to do what has happened there. He was allowed to do it. And somebody above is responsible. It's like a parent is ultimately responsible for the behaviour of an errant child. Somebody within Stevenage Borough Council, somebody within Mace, or possibly a combination of the two, has looked at the options and decided that despite the fact that there were two and possibly more demolition contractors highly regarded, highly respected and highly qualified, telling them that the approach that was being proposed was unsafe or potentially unsafe, and they have taken the other option. So when that finger of blame is pointed, it needs to be pointed at Stevenage Borough Council and at Mace and at anybody else that was involved in that decision-making process. Right, I'm going to come up for here because I've got a comment here from Chris Hynek. Morning, Chris. Scaffolds don't cause buildings to collapse. Buildings cause scaffolds to collapse when they're demolished in the wrong way. I've demolished 20-storey tower blocks in many cities, central London included, 5 metres from busy roads, and even in these cases, it's very difficult to get a road closure. How ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is that? Bearing in mind that Westminster Council will happily close the roads around Leicester Square to facilitate a film premiere. You know, those often highly dangerous film premieres in which Tom Cruise meanders about the place taking selfies and shakes hands with the people that have turned up to see the latest instalment of Mission Impossible. They can close a road or all the roads around Leicester Square, one of the busiest thoroughfares in the whole of the City of London. They can do that for a film premiere, but when you're taking down a tower block, as our friend Chris has pointed out there, you've got a tower block 20 stories, you've got a road beside it, and there is always a potential of a bit of concrete or a bit of steel going the wrong direction and landing in the road and possibly landing on a person or on a car. Apparently that becomes too difficult. Apparently that is too much to ask. It's an absolute bloody nonsense. It really is. And unfortunately, ultimately the clients are primarily to blame. The clients and the local authorities are primarily to blame. But all the time we've got demolition contractors that are willing to tip their cap and say, yes, Governor, I will do it exactly as you want. I'll do it with scaffold and hope for the best. And I'll hope that none of my men are hurt when that scaffolding come down. And I hope that we don't kill a taxi driver or a woman pushing a pram or anything like that. We'll do it exactly how you want to do it, even though we all know that you're not qualified to make that decision. How have we allowed this to go on? And bearing in mind, and I will keep going back to this, bearing in mind we have so many forms of precedent here. We had 3 back-to-back collapses in 2019, in Reading, in London, and then in Nuneaton, all of which have been at least partially investigated. I know at least 2 of those had an external audit on them. My guess is the HSE are still compiling the paperwork or whatever the hell it is that they do for all this time. But we have precedent. You know, I remember when I first heard about the collapse in Reading, because I'd been to that site several times. I knew the road, I knew the site. That was a main approach to Reading train station. Reading train station is one of the busiest stations in the whole of the UK outside of London. It is an absolute hub, Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people walk down that road each and every day. How nobody was injured or killed when that scaffold came down, it is beyond a miracle. It's almost as if God Almighty himself looked down upon the fine folks of Reading and said, no, not today, your number ain't up. But that was an absolute disaster waiting to happen. We know that. We've got the evidence of it. As I say, we had our preliminary report. The HSE have looked into it and are probably still looking into it. The NFDC, God bless them and all who sail in them, they put together a video in conjunction with the contractor involved. All of this is out there in the open. We all know this. We all know what happened there. We know what happened there. We know what happened in London. We know what happened in Nuneaton. And yet here we are 2 years, 3 years down the line, and it's happened again. I said in one of our recent shows, and I'm still not entirely sure whether Einstein ever actually said that, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing time and time and time again and expecting a different outcome. We now have four in recent history, 4 in the last 3 years of buildings with their scaffolding ending up on a British street. How many more do we need in order for the industry, for clients and for local authorities to say, do you know what, that'll do now, let's start closing some roads, let's start doing things in a more sensible manner. And I've got a horrible feeling that what it is going to take for that decision to finally be made is a fatality. I'm not naive enough to believe that the HSE is sat there drumming its fingers waiting for somebody to die. I'm certainly not saying that, but I think it needs an injury or a fatality before the entire industry goes, do you know what, enough now. But it's already there. We're already at enough. Mick Norton has been back in the chat. There's a very good article in the Construction Index on the 6th of November 2019 where a UK demolition boss, Richard Dolman of AR Demolition, good morning Richard, said that his industry should think twice about using scaffold to shroud buildings under demolition. There was a spate of scaffold collapses in Reading, Liverpool and Nuneaton, and in London as well. So it wasn't 3, it was 4. Yes, Richard Dolman has spoken out about this quite extensively, as have a lot of other people as well. As I say, this is not new. If this was the first time this had happened, it would be unfortunate. We'd all say something along the lines of "there, but for the grace of God." We may tuck this into our inner brain of, next time I'm facing a job, I might have to do it a different way because I've seen that and I've seen what happened. But it isn't. It isn't. It's happened time and time and time again. And yet here we are. A client and a principal contractor have looked at all the options and they have knowingly selected the one where there is a track record of problems. Why would you do that? And unfortunately, the only reason I can come up with is because it's the cheaper option or the more convenient option. Road closures, bit of a ball ache. You've got to redirect traffic. You've got to redirect a bus route possibly. What a pain in the arse that is. And yes, I'm sure it is. But I tell you what's a bigger pain in the arse. A bigger pain in the arse is a dead demolition contractor, a dead taxi driver, a dead infant, or a dead mother, or a dead person that was walking past on their way to the shops to do their midweek shopping. That's a pain in the arse. That's a proper pain in the arse. But unfortunately, I've got the horrible feeling that is what is required before somebody somewhere on high says, this is now outlawed. It shouldn't be like that, and I keep coming back to this. If a principal contractor and a client has so much faith in their demolition knowledge, expertise, and capabilities, do the job yourself. Do it yourself. Why the hell would you need a demolition contractor with their mess and their bad language and their ill-fitting PPE? Why bother yourself with demolition contractors who know what they're doing? You clearly know better than you do it. You take that building down because you clearly know better than those that do it for a living. Mick Norton can always be relied upon to draw upon the rules and regulations. CDM Regs 2015, demolition or dismantling 20. The demolition or dismantling of a structure must be planned and carried out in such a manner to prevent danger, or where it is not practicable to prevent it, to reduce danger to as low a level as reasonably practicable. The arrangements for carrying out such demolition or dismantling must be recorded in writing before the demolition or dismantling work begins. So, going back to what I said earlier, there will be a paper trail, and that paper trail will show, here are 2 contractors saying here is the safe way to do it. We'll have brocks. I think one had proposed mini excavators, the other had proposed brocks. But if you were using brocks, you could actually put the brocks up on the roof, no men anywhere near it, take it down floor by floor before handing over to a conventional excavator. And somebody has looked at that and has looked at that methodology and said, well, I can see why you're doing that, because you're concerned about the flimsy nature of that structure and about the potential of collapse. Nah, we'll be okay with that method there. That'll be fine. You know, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I'll tell you what the worst that could happen. Your building is going to end up in the street and possibly killing somebody. That's the worst that could happen. And somebody within Stevenage Borough Council, somebody within Mace, or possibly both, has signed off on precisely that. And all I can do now is hope against hope that when the investigation is carried out, that is revealed to the Health and Safety Executive, to the Magistrates Court that finally sits on that. And I sincerely hope, I've got no axe to grind with Stevenage Borough Council or with Mace, but I sincerely hope they get the book thrown out. And that the buck doesn't stop with the demolition contractor. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the demolition contractor is necessarily innocent in all of this, because as a demolition contractor you should know what you're doing, and if you've opted to use a method that you know to be questionable, then obviously, you know, the buck will at least partly stop with you. But ultimately, you know, the blame needs to flow uphill, and the way that blame should rest is with the people that made the decision. But we need a system now whereby the blame does flow uphill. When you think about the instance of corporate manslaughter, the owner or the principal of a demolition contractor can be sent to prison because an accident happened on a site that they've never even set foot on. So we have the ability to appoint the blame to the very tippity top of these things. Never mind investigating what caused the collapse. The cause of the collapse may have been, you know, a heavy-handed high-reach operator. It may have been the fragility of the building. It may have been poor methodology, poor planning. It could have been all of those things. But none of those would have happened had the right contractor and the right methodology been given the green light in the first place. So the ultimate blame here rests not with the high-reach operator, rests not with the demolition contractor, rests not with the principal of that demolition contractor. It rests with the principal contractor based on CDM regs, and it rests with the local authority whose job was being carried out there. I think this one may run and run. As I say, I have been speaking to a very well-known, a very well-qualified demolition engineer on this, and I'm hoping to get him on the show to talk about this in the next couple of days. Hopefully when the dust has settled over in Stevenage, we'll be able to bring you more of that.